Imagine being crowned king at just 2 months old, only to spend the next 23 years locked away in solitary confinement before being murdered. One future emperor was found trembling behind a curtain after his nephew's assassination, expecting death, but instead being hailed as Rome's new ruler. Teenage girl was declared queen, ruled for 9 days, and then faced execution, all because of the ambitions of powerful men. Number 9. The emperor who was found hiding behind a curtain. The year is 41 AD in Rome. Emperor Caligula, known for his wild eccentricities and brutal cruelty, had finally pushed his luck too far. Members of his own Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers meant to protect him, decided they'd had enough. They ambushed him in a secluded palace corridor, and well, let's just say he wouldn't be making any more public speeches. Chaos erupted. Soldiers were running wild. Senators were panicking, and the future of the Roman Empire hung in the balance. Amidst this bloody turmoil was a man named Tiberius Claudius Germanicus, Caligula's uncle. Claudius was about 50 years old and had spent most of his life on the fringes of the imperial family. He had physical infirmities, a limp, a stammer, and a tendency to drool, which led many, including his own family, to dismiss him as a bit of a fool. He was a scholar, more comfortable with books than with power, and had largely been kept out of public office. Some historians think he might have even played up his weaknesses to avoid the dangerous political games of the imperial court. Smart move, considering how many of his relatives ended up on the wrong side of a sword. So, while the assassins were finishing their work and the palace was in an uproar, Claudius was understandably terrified. He wasn't a plotter. He wasn't a soldier. He was just trying not to be the next victim. He found a hiding spot, ducking behind a large drape or curtain in one of the palace apartments. He probably hoped everyone would just forget he existed. Then, a soldier named Gratus, part of a group of guardsmen roaming the palace, stumbled upon him. Imagine the scene. The soldier pulls back the curtain, and there's Claudius, cowering, expecting the worst. Legend has it that Claudius fell to the soldier's feet and begged for his life. But Gratus and his fellow soldiers had a different idea. They weren't looking for more blood, at least not his. They needed an emperor, and fast. Before the Senate tried to restore the old republic or some other powerful general made a play for the throne. Claudius was a member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a direct link to Augustus. He was, in their eyes, a surprisingly convenient candidate. So, instead of killing him, they hailed him as emperor. Claudius, still probably shaking like a leaf, was reportedly carried on their shoulders to the Praetorian camp. He must have thought it was some kind of bizarre dream. Meanwhile, the Senate was in session, debating what to do. Some senators did indeed want to restore the republic. Others had their own candidates for emperor. Praetorian Guard held the real power in that moment. They had Claudius, and they had the swords. Claudius, showing a surprising bit of political savvy, or maybe just good advice, promised a large sum of money, a donative, to each Praetorian Guard. This was a dangerous precedent, essentially the army being paid to install an emperor, but it worked. The Senate, faced with the united might of the Praetorians and their chosen candidate, had little choice but to confirm Claudius as the new emperor of Rome. And so, the man who was found quivering behind a curtain, the scholar everyone underestimated, took the throne. He would go on to rule for 13 years, overseeing the expansion of the empire into Britain and undertaking numerous public works, proving many of his doubters very wrong. Number 8. The baby who became emperor, then vanished into a fortress. Imagine being born into the highest echelons of power, only for your life to become a tragic footnote in history. This is the story of Ivan VI of Russia, an emperor whose reign was one of the shortest and saddest. He was born in August 1740, the great-nephew of the reigning empress, Anna Ivanovna. Empress Anna had no direct heirs and was determined to keep the throne within her father's lineage, Ivan V, rather than let it pass to the descendants of Peter the Great. So shortly before her death, she named the infant Ivan as her successor. In October 1740, Empress Anna died. Little Ivan Antonovich, barely 2 months old, was proclaimed Emperor Ivan VI of all the Russias. Of course, a baby couldn't actually rule. A regency was set up, initially headed by Ernst Johann von Biron, the Empress's unpopular lover and advisor. Biron's regency didn't last long. He was soon overthrown in a palace coup, led by Ivan's own mother, Anna Leopoldovna. She then became regent for her infant son. Anna Leopoldovna, however, was reportedly more interested in her personal affairs than in governing the vast Russian Empire. Her regency was marked by inefficiency and growing discontent among the powerful guards, regiments, and nobility, many of whom favored Peter the Great's daughter, Elizabeth Petrovna. Political situation was incredibly unstable. Whispers and plots filled the St. Petersburg air. Elizabeth Petrovna, Mijik and popular, saw her chance. In the dead of night, on December 6, 1741, just over a year after Ivan VI became emperor, Elizabeth, backed by the Preobrazhensky regiment, staged a bloodless coup. The little emperor, his parents, and his infant sister Catherine were all arrested in their beds. Ivan VI was just over 1 year old when his reign abruptly ended. What followed for Ivan was a life of unimaginable cruelty. Elizabeth couldn't bring herself to execute a child, especially one who was an innocent pawn, but she also couldn't risk him becoming a rallying point for opposition. So, the decision was made to make him disappear. The family was initially exiled to Dunamunda, near Riga, then to Kolmogorov in the far north. Throughout this time, Ivan was kept in strict isolation from his parents, even though they were imprisoned in the same fortress. He grew up knowing nothing but confinement. Orders were given that he should see no one, learn nothing, and effectively cease to exist in the public mind. All coins bearing his image were recalled and melted down. Documents mentioning him were destroyed, and it was forbidden to speak his name. He became a state secret, a phantom. As he grew older, Ivan was moved to the Schlisselburg fortress, a notorious political prison on an island in Lake Ladoga. He was kept in a solitary cell, known only as a certain prisoner, or nameless prisoner, no one. There are conflicting accounts of his mental state. Some say he was aware of his imperial origins and longed for freedom. Others suggest that decades of isolation had left him severely impaired. The secrecy around him was intense. When Catherine the Great, who had overthrown her own husband Peter III, Elizabeth's successor, came to the throne in 1762, she visited Ivan in Schlisselburg. She too recognized the danger he posed, even as a broken man. Strict orders remained in place. If any attempt was made to free him, he was to be killed immediately. That tragic order came to pass in 1764. A disgruntled army officer named Vasily Mirovich learned of Ivan's identity and location and plotted to release him, hoping to restore him to the throne and gain favor. Mirovich managed to overpower some of the fortress guards, but when he reached Ivan's cell, Ivan's jailers, following their standing instructions, murdered the 23-year-old prisoner. Ivan VI, the boy emperor who never had a chance to rule or even live a normal life, died as he had lived for almost his entire existence, a captive. Mirovich was later arrested and executed. Ivan's story is a stark reminder of the brutal realities of power struggles and the human cost of dynastic ambitions. Number 7. The teen queen who ruled for 9 days and lost her head. Picture this. You're a highly educated, devoutly Protestant teenage girl in 16th century England, more interested in your books than in courtly intrigue. Then suddenly, you're told you're going to be Queen of England. It sounds like a fairy tale, but for Lady Jane Grey, it was the beginning of a nightmare that ended on the executioner's block. Her reign lasted a mere 9 days, a blip in the grand sweep of history, but a profoundly tragic one. Lady Jane Grey was born around 1537, a great-granddaughter of King Henry VII. This gave her a claim to the throne, albeit a somewhat distant one, compared to Henry VIII's direct children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. Jane was known for her intelligence and strong Protestant faith, receiving an excellent humanist education. She was also a pawn in the high-stakes political games of the Tudor court. Key player in Jane's brief ascent was John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Northumberland was the immensely powerful regent for the young King Edward VI, Henry VIII's son, who was also a staunch Protestant. Edward was a sickly teenager, and by early 1553, it was clear he didn't have long to live. This presented a huge problem for Northumberland and other Protestant nobles. Edward's legal heir, according to Henry VIII's will, was his older half-sister, Mary Tudor. Mary was a devout Catholic, and her accession to the throne would mean the reversal of the English Reformation and a potential loss of power and land for men like Northumberland. So, a plan was hatched. Northumberland persuaded the dying Edward VI to alter the line of succession. In a document called the Device for the Succession, Edward bypassed his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth, both of whom had been declared illegitimate at various points by their father, though later reinstated in the line of succession, and named his cousin Lady Jane Grey as his heir. To cement this, Northumberland quickly arranged for Jane to marry his own son, Lord Guildford Dudley. Jane was reportedly not keen on the marriage or the idea of becoming queen, but in that era, young women, even noble ones, had little say in such matters. King Edward VI died on July 6, 1553. For a few days, his death was kept secret as Northumberland consolidated his plans. On July 10th, Lady Jane Grey, then about 16 or 17, was proclaimed Queen of England. Accounts suggest she was overwhelmed and reluctant, even fainting when the news was formally delivered. She was moved to the Tower of London, which was traditionally a royal residence before a coronation, but it would soon become her prison. Northumberland's scheme, however, unraveled with astonishing speed. He had fatally misjudged public opinion. Despite the religious divide, many English people believed Mary Tudor had the rightful claim as Henry VIII's daughter. Mary, far from backing down, proclaimed herself queen in East Anglia and quickly gathered a massive army of supporters. As Mary's support grew, Northumberland's dwindled. Even the members of the Privy Council who had initially acquiesced to Jane's proclamation began to switch sides. Northumberland marched out of London with troops to confront Mary, but his forces deserted him. Back in London, the Privy Council declared Mary Queen on July 19, 1553, just 9 days after Jane's proclamation. Queen Jane, the quondam, the former queen, as she was now called, was arrested and remained a prisoner in the Tower. Her father-in-law, Northumberland, was executed for treason. Initially, Mary I was inclined to be lenient towards Jane and her husband, Guildford. They were tried and found guilty of treason in November 1553, but Mary hesitated to sign their death warrants. Jane was, after all, a young pawn in a man's game. However, a Protestant uprising in early 1554, known as Wyatt's Rebellion, which aimed in part to restore Jane to the throne, or at least prevent Mary's deeply unpopular marriage to Philip II of Spain, sealed Jane's fate. Although Jane had no involvement in the rebellion, it convinced Mary and her counselors that Jane would always be a focus for Protestant plots as long as she lived. Mary offered Jane a chance to save her life by converting to Catholicism, but Jane, true to her strong Protestant convictions, refused. On February 12, 1554, Lady Jane Grey and her husband, Guildford Dudley, were executed. Jane met her end with remarkable courage and dignity for someone so young, reportedly reciting a psalm as she went to the scaffold. Her story is a heartbreaking example of how personal lives can be destroyed by the ruthless pursuit of political power. Number 6. The young woman crowned king to save her kingdom. In medieval Europe, the idea of a woman ruling in her own right was rare, often controversial, and usually only happened when there were no viable male heirs. But the story of Jadwiga of Poland in the late 14th century has a particularly peculiar twist. She wasn't just a queen, she was officially crowned king. Jadwiga was born in 1373 or 1374, the youngest daughter of Louis the Great, King of Hungary and Poland, and Elizabeth of Bosnia. Louis had no sons, so the succession of his vast territories was a major concern. He had initially intended for his eldest daughter, Catherine, to inherit Poland, but Catherine died young. Then Maria, his next daughter, was designated. But Polish nobles were wary of continuing a personal union with Hungary, especially under Maria's intended husband, Sigismund of Luxembourg. When Louis the Great died in 1382, Poland faced a crisis. Polish nobles, exercising their power, rejected Maria and Sigismund. After a period of interregnum, a time without a monarch, they eventually agreed to accept Louis's youngest daughter, Jadwiga, as their ruler, but with a very specific condition. She had to come to Poland and be crowned there, and her future husband would be chosen with their consent. So, in 1384, at the tender age of 10 or 11, Jadwiga traveled from Hungary to Krakow, the Polish capital. On October 16, 1384, she was crowned. And here's the really interesting part. The official title used for her coronation was Rex Poloniae, King of Poland, not Regina Poloniae, Queen of Poland. This wasn't a typo. By crowning her king, the Polish nobility emphasized that she was a monarch in her own right, with the full sovereign powers that entailed, not merely a queen consort or a regent. It was a legal and symbolic way to assert her independent authority and the sovereignty of the Polish crown, independent of any future husband. Now, Jadwiga was already betrothed. Since childhood, she had been promised to William, a Habsburg, Duke of Austria. By all accounts, young Jadwiga was fond of William, and he of her. William even came to Krakow in 1385, hoping to consummate the marriage and secure his position. But the Polish lords had other plans that were far more strategically beneficial for Poland. To the east lay the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, a vast pagan territory often in conflict with Poland and the Teutonic Knights. The Lithuanian Grand Duke Jogaila, often known by his later Polish name, Władysław Jagiello, saw an opportunity, proposed marriage to Jadwiga. In return, he promised to convert himself and all of Lithuania to Roman Catholicism, merge Lithuania with Poland, though the exact nature of this union would evolve, and use Lithuanian forces to help Poland regain lost territories. This was an incredibly tempting offer for the Polish nobles. It meant the Christianization of a huge neighbor, the end of Lithuanian raids, a powerful ally against the Teutonic Knights, and the creation of a massive, influential state. Pressure on Jadwiga, who was now around 12 years old, must have been immense. She was reportedly deeply distressed at the thought of giving up William for Jogaila, who was much older, and, at the time, a pagan stranger. Stories abound of her piety and her internal struggle, praying for guidance. There's a tale that she even tried to chop down the gate of Wawel Castle with an axe to escape and join William, but was persuaded to stay. Ultimately, whether through piety, a sense of duty, or simply the overwhelming pressure from the powerful nobles, Jadwiga consented. Her childhood betrothal to William was annulled. In February 1386, Jogaila was baptized, taking the Christian name Vladislav. He married Jadwiga shortly thereafter, and in March 1386 he was crowned King of Poland, ruling alongside Jadwiga. Jadwiga, despite her youth, played an active role in political and cultural life. She was known for her charity, her piety, and her efforts to promote education and culture, including refounding the University of Krakow. Jadwiga and Władysław Jagiello had only one child, a daughter named Elizabeth Bonifacia, who died shortly after birth in 1399. Jadwiga herself died a few weeks later from complications related to childbirth, only in her mid-20s. Though her life was short, her decision to marry Jagiello had profound and lasting consequences, paving the way for the Polish-Lithuanian Union, which would become one of the largest and most powerful states in Europe for centuries. Her reign as King Jadwiga remains a unique chapter in European royal history. Number 5. The little boy who became an emperor, then a puppet, then a gardener. Imagine being placed on an ancient, revered throne as a toddler, worshipped as a near deity, only to be swept aside by revolution, then propped up as a figurehead by foreign invaders, and finally ending your days as an ordinary citizen in a communist state. This was the extraordinary, almost unbelievable life journey of Puyi, the last emperor of China. Born Aisin Puyi in 1906, he was just 2 years old when the ailing Empress Dowager Cixi, who had controlled China for decades, chose him as the successor to the Guangxu emperor. On her deathbed in November 1908, Cixi decreed that Puyi would become emperor. His father, Prince Chun, would be regent. Days later, both the Guangxu emperor and Cixi were dead, and little Puyi, not yet 3, was formally ascended to the dragon throne as the Yuantong emperor. Life for the child emperor was a bizarre bubble of ancient ritual and isolation within the vastness of the forbidden city in Beijing. He was surrounded by eunuchs and courtiers, who kowtowed to his every whim. He had little understanding of the immense empire he supposedly ruled, or the political storms gathering outside the palace walls. He was a lonely boy, prone to pranks and cruelty, perhaps as a way of coping with his strange upbringing and wielding the only power he understood. He famously recounted how he would have his eunuchs whipped for minor infractions. Meanwhile, China was in turmoil. Revolutionary sentiment, led by figures like Sun Yat-sen, was growing, fueled by anti-Manchu feeling and a desire for a modern republic. In October 1911, the Enhai Revolution broke out. The Dinga dynasty, which had ruled China since 1644, was crumbling. On February 12, 1912, under pressure from General Yuan Shikai, Puyi's regent, Empress Dowager Longyu, widow of the Guangxu emperor, signed the imperial edict of the abdication of the Taizong emperor. The 6-year-old Puyi officially abdicated, bringing an end to over 2,000 years of imperial rule in China. However, the abdication agreement included favorable terms for the imperial family. Puyi was allowed to keep his imperial title, continue living in the northern part of the Forbidden City, and receive a substantial government subsidy. He was essentially a kept emperor in a republic. Continued his traditional education, even having a Scottish tutor, Reginald Johnston, who introduced him to Western ideas and became a significant influence. This strange existence lasted until 1924. A warlord named Feng Yuxiang seized Beijing and expelled Puyai and his court from the Forbidden City. Puyai, now a young man, took refuge in the Japanese concession in Tianjin. This period marked a turning point. He became increasingly bitter about his lost throne and dreamed of restoration. The Japanese, who had their own expansionist ambitions in China, saw Puyi as a potentially useful pawn. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, Puyai's ancestral homeland. In 1932, they established the puppet state of Manchukuo and installed Puyi as its chief executive. 2 years later, in 1934, he was enthroned as the Kangdi Emperor of Manchukuo. He was an emperor again, but in reality he was a figurehead with no real power, controlled entirely by his Japanese masters. He lived in relative luxury, but was under constant surveillance. This second reign ended with Japan's defeat in World War II in 1945. Puyai was captured by Soviet forces as he tried to flee to Japan. He spent 5 years in a Soviet prison camp, testifying at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal against his former Japanese handlers. In 1950, he was extradited to China, now the People's Republic under Mao Zedong. Instead of execution, Puyi was sent to the Fushun War Criminals Management Center for re-education. He spent nearly 10 years there, learning communist ideology and confessing his crimes as a feudal ruler and Japanese collaborator. He was released in 1959 by special pardon. The former Son of Heaven then became an ordinary citizen. He worked first at the Beijing Botanical Garden, tending plants, and later as an editor for the literary department of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. He even married an ordinary woman, a hospital nurse named Li Shuxian, in 1962. He wrote his autobiography, From Emperor to Citizen, which became a bestseller. Puyi, the last emperor, died of kidney cancer in Beijing in 1967, having lived through some of the most dramatic transformations in Chinese history, his own life a mirror of those tumultuous times. Number 4. The king whose madness nearly gave his kingdom away. Crown of France in the late 14th and early 15th centuries rested uneasily on the head of Charles VI, a king whose reign was tragically marred by recurrent bouts of severe mental illness. His condition didn't just cause personal suffering, it plunged France into chaos, weakened the monarchy, and led to one of the most peculiar and humiliating moments in French succession history, a treaty that disinherited his own son in favor of the English king. Charles VI, often called Charles the Well-Beloved, early in his reign and later Charles the Mad, ascended to the throne in 1380 at the age of 11. His early years as king showed promise, but in 1392, while leading a military expedition, he experienced his first terrifying episode of madness. Accounts say he suddenly became convinced he was being betrayed, drew his sword, and attacked his own men, killing several knights before he could be subdued. This was the beginning of a lifelong struggle with mental illness that would come and go with periods of lucidity interspersed with terrifying delusions. During his episodes, Charles sometimes didn't recognize his own wife, Isabeau of Bavaria, or his children. He would run wildly through the palace corridors, refuse to bathe or change clothes for months, and at one point famously suffered from the glass delusion, the belief that he was made of glass and might shatter if touched. He even had iron rods sewn into his clothing to prevent himself from breaking. King, unable to consistently govern, created a massive power vacuum. France was already embroiled in the 100 Years' War with England. Charles's incapacity led to fierce rivalries between powerful French nobles, particularly his uncles, the Dukes of Burgundy Berry and Bourbon, and his brother Louis, Duke of Orleans. These factions, known as the Armagnacs, supporting Orleans, and the Burgundians, vied for control of the government and the kingdom's resources, often leading to civil war. The situation went from bad to catastrophic after the English, under King Henry V, won a decisive victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. This victory crippled the French military and allowed Henry V to conquer large parts of northern France, including Normandy. The French internal divisions, fueled by Charles VI's madness, made a unified defense almost impossible. John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, even allied himself with the English at certain points. In this climate of defeat, internal strife, and royal incapacity, the infamous Treaty of Troyes was signed in 1420. This treaty was a desperate measure, largely orchestrated by Queen Isabeau, whose relationship with her son, the Dauphin Charles, was terrible, and Philip the Good, the new Duke of Burgundy, who sought revenge for his father's assassination by Armagnac partisans. The treaty declared that King Charles VI would remain King of France for his lifetime. However, upon his death, the French crown would not pass to his own son, the Dauphin Charles, the future Charles VII. Instead, Henry V of England, who was to marry Charles VI's daughter, Catherine of Valois, would become regent of France and heir to the French throne. Their future son would then unite the crowns of England and France. Essentially, Charles VI, in a period when he was lucid enough or pressured enough to agree, disinherited his own son and effectively handed his kingdom over to his English enemies. The Dauphin Charles, of course, refused to accept this treaty. He declared himself regent and continued the fight from the territory south of the Loire River that remained loyal to him, earning him the mocking nickname King of Boers. Fate had a strange twist in store. Henry V of England died unexpectedly in August 1422, just 2 months before Charles VI. This meant that Henry V never actually became King of France. When Charles VI died in October 1422, Henry V's infant son, Henry VI of England, was proclaimed King of England and France, according to the terms of the Treaty of Troyes. France now had 2 claimants to the throne: the baby Henry VI, recognized in English-controlled territories, and the Dauphin Charles, who proclaimed himself King Charles VII in his southern strongholds. The madness of Charles VI didn't directly cause him to sign the treaty in a fit of delusion, but his decades of incapacitation created the political weakness, divisions, and desperation that made such a bizarre and nationally humiliating succession plan possible. It would take years of further warfare, famously aided by Joan of Arc, for Charles VII to eventually reclaim his kingdom and be crowned at Reims, nullifying the peculiar succession dictated by the Treaty of Troyes. Number 3. The German princess who stole an empire from her husband. Catherine the Great of Russia is one of history's most famous female rulers, an enlightened despot who expanded her empire and patronized the arts. But her path to the throne was anything but straightforward or legitimate by birth. She wasn't even Russian. She was a minor German princess who seized power in a daring coup d'etat, overthrowing her own husband, Emperor Peter III. Born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729 in Stettin, Prussia, now Szczecin, Poland. She was chosen at the age of 14 by Empress Elizabeth of Russia as a bride for her nephew and heir, Peter, Duke of Holstein-Gottorp. Sophie, converted to Russian Orthodoxy, took the name Yekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine, and dedicated herself to learning the Russian language and customs. She was intelligent, ambitious, and keenly aware of the importance of winning over the Russian court and people. Her marriage to Peter, which took place in 1745, was a disaster. Peter was immature, eccentric, and openly disdainful of Russia. idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia, Russia's traditional enemy, and made no secret of his pro-Prussian sentiments. He was reportedly cruel to Catherine, took numerous mistresses, and was widely considered unfit to rule the vast Russian Empire. Catherine, meanwhile, cultivated relationships with powerful figures at court, in the military, especially the influential Guards regiments, and among the clergy. She was also known to have several lovers, some of whom became key political allies. For years, she patiently bided her time, observing the political landscape and building her support base. Empress Elizabeth died in January 1762, New Style, and Peter ascended to the throne as Emperor Peter III. His brief reign was a whirlwind of unpopular policies. He immediately withdrew Russia from the 7 Years' War against Prussia, effectively snatching defeat from the jaws of victory and angering much of the military who felt their sacrifices had been for nothing. He alienated the Orthodox Church by attempting to secularize church lands and reform religious practices. He also planned a risky war against Denmark to pursue his Holstein territorial claims, a conflict that held no interest for Russia. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and rumors circulated that he intended to divorce Catherine, declare their son Paul illegitimate, and marry his mistress. Catherine knew her position, and possibly her life was in danger. The support of her lover Grigory Orlov and his brothers, all influential officers in the Guards, along with other powerful nobles and clergy who were fed up with Peter, a plot was set in motion. In late June 1762, just 6 months into Peter's reign, the coup began. Peter was away at his Oranienbaum estate. Catherine, tipped off that one of their co-conspirators had been arrested, acted decisively. She was secretly brought to St. Petersburg, where the Guards regiments quickly declared their allegiance to her. She appeared in uniform, rallying the troops and presenting herself as the defender of Russia and the Orthodox faith against a dangerous and incompetent emperor. Clergy and the Senate also swore fealty to her. By the time Peter III realized what was happening and tried to muster support, it was too late. His attempts to resist were feeble and disorganized. He was arrested and forced to abdicate on July 9th, 1762. Catherine was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, autocrat of all the Russias. Just over a week after his abdication, Peter III died under mysterious circumstances while in the custody of Catherine's supporters at a country estate called Ropsha. The official cause of death was given as hemorrhoidal colic, but it was widely believed then and now that he was murdered, possibly strangled, with or without Catherine's direct order. While there's no definitive proof of her involvement in his death, it certainly removed a major threat to her newly acquired throne. So a German princess, with no hereditary claim to the Russian throne beyond her marriage to the man she overthrew, became one of Russia's most powerful and long-reigning monarchs. Her succession was a pure power grab, brilliantly executed, demonstrating her political acumen, ruthlessness, and ability to inspire loyalty. She would go on to rule for 34 years, leaving an indelible mark on Russia, all thanks to a peculiar and audacious path to power. Number 2. The Queen who reigned for a day to unite two kingdoms. Most monarchs cling to power, but what if a queen took the throne with the express purpose of giving it up almost immediately? That's the unusual story of Berengaria of Castile, a woman who became queen for a very short time, not for personal glory, but as a clever, strategic move to ensure her son inherited a larger, unified kingdom. Her brief reign was a pivotal moment in the history of Spain. Berengaria was born around 1179 or 1180, the eldest daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, who was herself a daughter of Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Talk about a power pedigree. As the eldest child, she was initially the heir presumptive to the Castilian throne. However, the birth of a younger brother, Ferdinand, temporarily displaced her in the line of succession. In 1197, Berengaria married King Alfonso IX of Leon. This marriage was politically motivated, aimed at creating peace between the neighboring Christian kingdoms of Castile and Leon, which often found themselves in conflict. The couple had 5 children, including a son named Ferdinand, the future Ferdinand III. However, the marriage was problematic from a religious standpoint. Berengaria and Alfonso IX were second cousins, and Pope Innocent III eventually annulled their marriage in 1204 on grounds of consanguinity. Being too closely related, Berengaria returned to Castile with her children, except for the eldest son, Ferdinand, who initially stayed with his father in Leon. Back in Castile, the succession situation became complicated again. Berengaria's younger brother, Ferdinand, who had been the heir, died in 1211. Then her father, King Alfonso VIII, died in 1214. Crown of Castile passed to Alfonso VIII's youngest surviving child, Berengaria's even younger brother, Henry I, who was only about 10 years old. Berengaria became regent for her young brother. Being regent was a tough job. There were ambitious nobles vying for influence and control over the boy king. Tragically, young King Henry I died in 1217 at the age of 13, killed by a falling roof tile while playing with other young nobles. This sudden death meant that Berengaria was now, by right of succession, the Queen of Castile. Castilian throne was hers. And this is where the peculiarity comes in. Berengaria could have chosen to rule as Queen Regnant. She was intelligent, experienced in governance from her time as regent, and had a strong claim. However, she recognized that a female ruler might face challenges and instability, especially with powerful nobles eager to assert themselves. More importantly, she saw a golden opportunity to unite the kingdoms of Castile and Leon through her son, Ferdinand. Her son, Ferdinand, born of her marriage to Alfonso IX of Leon, was already heir to Leon through his father. If he could also inherit Castile, the two powerful kingdoms could finally be joined. So Berengaria made a swift and decisive move. She formally claimed the throne of Castile, becoming Queen Berengaria. But almost immediately, some accounts say on the very same day, others within a few weeks, she abdicated her rights in favor of her son, Ferdinand. This strategically brilliant act ensured a smooth transition and placed her son on the Castilian throne as King Ferdinand III of Castile in 1217. Her ex-husband, Alfonso IX of Leon, wasn't initially thrilled with this development. He had hoped to claim Castile for himself upon Henry I's death, based on old agreements. But Berengaria and Ferdinand III managed to fend off his claims, partly through military strength and partly through diplomacy and a hefty payment to Alfonso IX. The final piece of Berengaria's plan fell into place when Alfonso IX of Leon died in 1230. Alfonso IX had tried to disinherit his son Ferdinand, now King of Castile, from the Leonese succession, naming his daughters Sancha and Dulce, from an earlier marriage, as his heirs. However, Berengaria once again stepped in. Through shrewd negotiation with the Treaty of Beneventi, or Concord of Beneventi, she persuaded Sancha and Dulce to renounce their claims to Leon in exchange for a generous lifetime income. With this final obstacle removed, Ferdinand III, already King of Castile, also became King of Leon, permanently uniting the two most important Christian kingdoms of medieval Iberia under a single crown. This union was a crucial step in the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Moorish rule. Ferdinand III, known as the Saint, would go on to be a highly successful and revered king. While Berengaria's reign as Queen of Castile was one of the shortest on record, her actions were profoundly significant. She used her brief moment as queen not for personal power, but as a conduit to achieve a larger dynastic and political goal, shaping the future of Spain. She remained an influential advisor to her son throughout his reign, a true power behind and briefly on the throne. Number 1. The king whose mom walked through fire to prove he was royal. Imagine your entire claim to a kingdom rested on your mother, surviving an ordeal by fire. That's not a scene from a fantasy novel, but a real-life drama from 13th century Norway. And it was central to the succession of King Haakon IV Håkonsson, also known as Haakon the Old. His path to the throne was anything but ordinary, beginning with a secret romance and culminating in a trial that sounds like something out of legend. Haakon IV was born in 1204 in the midst of a fierce civil war era in Norway. This period saw a struggle for power between two main factions, the Birkebeiners and the Baglers. Haakon's father was Haakon III, Sverresson, the Birkebeiner king. His mother was Inga of Varteg. Inga was not Haakon III's wife. Their relationship was a liaison, and Haakon IV was an illegitimate son. King Haakon III died suddenly in January 1204, possibly from poisoning, unaware that Inga was pregnant with his child. After the king's death, Inga gave birth to baby Haakon in territory controlled by the rival Bagler faction, who would certainly have seen the infant as a threat if his paternity became known. Recognizing the danger, a group of loyal Birkebeiner warriors undertook a daring and legendary rescue mission in the winter of 1205 to 1206. They skied through treacherous snow-covered mountains in the dead of winter, carrying the young child to safety in Nidaros, modern-day Trondheim, the Birkebeiner stronghold. This dramatic journey is still commemorated in Norway by the Birkebeiner Rennet, a long-distance ski race. Young Haakon was then raised in the court of King Inge II Bardsson, who had succeeded Haakon III as the Birkebeiner king. While he was acknowledged by some Birkebeiners as Haakon III's son, his claim was not universally accepted, especially given his illegitimate birth and the politically charged atmosphere. The Baglers, of course, disputed his parentage entirely. When King Inge II died in 1217 without a direct heir, the question of succession became critical. There were several candidates, including Inge's legitimate half-brother, Skul Bardsson, who was a powerful earl and had expected to inherit. However, a strong faction of Birkebeiners supported young Haakon Håkonsson, then just 13 years old. They argued that he was the direct male line descendant of King Sverre, Haakon III's father, a highly revered figure. To settle the dispute and definitively prove Haakon's royal lineage, a dramatic step was taken. In 1218, at a national assembly in Bergen, Haakon's mother, Inga of Varteg, agreed to undergo an ordeal by hot iron, also known as Jernbird. This was an ancient Germanic practice, sometimes used in legal cases where evidence was lacking. The accused, or in this case, the one proving a claim, had to carry red-hot iron bars for a certain distance. Their hands were then bandaged. After a few days, the bandages were removed. If the wounds were healing cleanly, it was seen as a sign from God of their innocence or the truth of their claim. If the wounds were festering, it meant guilt or falsehood. This was an incredibly high-stakes gamble. If Inge failed the ordeal, Haakon's claim to the throne would be shattered, and his life might even be in danger. But Inge bravely went through with it. Accounts state that she successfully carried the hot iron and her hands healed, thus proving to the satisfaction of those present and under the prevailing beliefs of the time, that she was telling the truth about Haucon's paternity and that he was indeed the son of King Haakon III. Following this divine judgment, Haakon IV was officially recognized as King of Norway. However, due to his youth, Earl Skule Bardsson was appointed regent and ruled for him during his minority. The relationship between Haakon and Skule remained tense. Skule still harbored ambitions for the throne, and even had himself proclaimed king by his own supporters in 1239, leading to a final, decisive conflict. Haakon defeated Skule, who was killed in 1240, cementing Haakon IV's sole rule. Haakon IV went on to have a long and relatively successful reign, lasting until his death in 1263. He brought an end to the Civil War era, centralized royal power, oversaw a flourishing of Norwegian culture, the Golden Age, and expanded Norwegian influence, particularly over Iceland and Greenland. But his extraordinary journey to the throne, hinging on a secret birth, a perilous escape as an infant, and his mother's courageous trial by fire, remains one of the most peculiar and dramatic succession stories in royal history.